Well, I apologize that I may not be able to join you in your class today. I mean, I was hoping to be able to do that, but I'm not sure that I can. So I wanted to talk with you, regardless, a little bit about what we were talking about previously on the last video, and that was costs. And the subject of the chapter is costs, right? And the reason that we're talking about cost is because we were building profit. And remember, we said that profit is defined as total revenue, which is the price of everything the firm sells times the quantity of everything the firm sells, minus total costs. So if we take the total revenue minus the total cost, we get the profit. And our big argument is that profit is what motivates firms' behavior. So firms are motivated by maximizing profits. Now, this seems simple enough, but there is a bit of a twist that we talked about. And Mr. Spinola said you guys have a little bit of trouble understanding that. And that twist was that in economics, we define profit in two ways. We talk about accounting profits and economic profits. Accounting profits are profits where we take total revenue minus explicit costs. And economic profits is when we take total revenue minus explicit and implicit costs. Now, we talked a little bit about those implicit costs, and Mr. Spinola said you're having a little trouble understanding that. So when I speak with you live, I'll talk with you a little bit more about that. But we also talked about, in kind of wrapping up that video, if you watched it, is we talked about a time horizon for firms. And we said there's the short run and the long run. Now, the definition of the short run is super duper important to understanding the cost that firms face in the short run. In the short run, all firms face the same cost structure, largely because of how the short run is defined. It's defined as the time period in which capital is fixed, right? Which means that the productive capacity of the firm is fixed. Capital is fixed, productive capacity is fixed. That those two things are synonymous. Now, let me give you an example that maybe helps you to understand what we mean about productive capacity and fixed capital. Let's say we had a pizza shop, right? And in the pizza shop, we had an oven. That's capital, right? We had a paddle. That's capital. We had a cash register, a phone. All of those things are capital, right? We had coolers. We had countertops. All of those things are capital, right? We had so much space in the building. That's capital. We had floor space. That's capital. Everything that is made by man that can be used to make a pizza in that shop is capital. Now, at any given time, that capital is fixed. So we go down to the pizza shop tomorrow. We only have so much capital. The oven is fixed. We can't change it that night, right? So the question is, how many pizzas can we make in an hour? Well, what determines that? What determines that is the capital, right? We can only make so many pizzas because we only have so much space, we only have so much counter space, we only have so much oven space, and no matter what we do, there'll be a maximum, right? That maximum is the productive capacity. What's it based on? The capital. In the short run, that can't change. Now, how long's the short run? Well, for the pizza shop, the short run could be 6 months to fix the capital. The new oven, expand the thing. Maybe it's 3 months. Maybe in some firms it might be 2 years. Maybe it might be 5 years. Maybe it might be 2 weeks. Whatever time period it takes to alter the capital is the short run. But in the short run, the capital is fixed. Now, Mr. Spinola was talking to you about diminishing returns. When we add a variable input, and he talked with you about this, I'm sure, a variable input, say labor, to fixed capital, what happens? So if I have the pizza shop, and I have the oven, and I have the paddles, and I have all of that stuff, and I add a worker to the pizza shop, then the worker in the capital or with the capital can produce so many pizzas, right? So I add one worker, right? And when I add one worker, if he works as hard or she works as hard as she can an hour, she can produce 10 pizzas. I add two workers. The second worker is called the marginal worker, right? The last worker added is called the marginal, right? So when I add the second worker, what's inevitably going to happen to the number of pizzas that I can produce? Well, you would suspect it would go up, right? You would suspect if the first worker could produce 10 and I add a second one, together they might be able to produce 25, right? If I add a third worker, you would hope that they could produce more, and a fourth worker, even more. But what we would discover is when I add the first worker, he or she can produce 10 units. The worker I add is the marginal worker, the last worker added. When I add the second worker, maybe now the number of units goes to 25. The change in the total is called the marginal product. So going from 10 to 25, the change in the total is 15, right? So the change in the total product, the total production, is called the marginal product. Well, the marginal product for the first worker was 10. For the second worker, it was 15. Now I had a third worker. Maybe with the third worker, the number of units produced only goes up to 33. Well, that's only 8 more. Is that possible? Right? Yeah, sure. Now I had a fourth worker. Now maybe it only goes up to 38. Only 5 units. Is that possible? Sure, it's likely. In fact, it's always going to happen, right? As I keep adding a variable input like labor to fixed capital, eventually, because there's fixed capital, there won't be any additional production, right? So we call this the law of diminishing marginal returns, right? As you add a variable input to fixed capital, it declines. If you look in your textbook, they have illustrations of this using numbers, and I'm sure Mr. Spinola put on the board an illustration of this using numbers. Now, the last thing I want to say about it is this: that diminishing returns is what defines costs in the short run. So Mr. Spinola today, he's going to talk about cost curves. He's going to talk about total costs. He's going to talk about variable costs. He's going to talk about average total cost, average variable cost. He's going to talk about average fixed cost. And he's going to illustrate to you on some level the shape of curves. And really what we're interested in is averages, right? The average cost. And the average is always the per unit. So he's going to illustrate that. He's going to talk with you about it. And he's going to say to you that every firm is going to face the same cost structure as illustrated by these curves. And you're going to wonder yourself, you're going to say, my goodness, wonder why that's true. And the answer is going to be this: because capital is fixed in the short run. Because capital is fixed in the short run, there are diminishing returns. And because there are diminishing returns, costs take the structure that they do. Oh, let's say it again. Right? Capital is fixed in the short run. There's only so much you can produce. So when you add a variable input, there's diminishing returns. And that diminishing returns is what defines costs in the short run. So when Mr. Spinola talks about the average total cost falling, bottoming, and rising, average variable cost falling, bottoming, and rising, average fixed cost falling and falling and falling and falling and falling, right? The reason that's true is because capital is fixed in the short run, because that creates diminishing returns, and diminishing returns defines that cost structure. Now that might be a little difficult to understand, but Mr. Spinola is going to explain it to you, and I'm going to at some point appear, right, and hopefully explain it with you a little bit as well. All right.